Good morning.
Good morning. I was going to say that too. Good morning.
You guys are in for a show. It's after 5, so it's not just 5 o'clock somewhere, it's 5 o'clock here. So my name's Mark Simos. I'm an architect on the cybersecurity practice at Microsoft, which is part of our consulting group. And this is Aaron Margosis.
Hi, I'm Aaron Margosis, principal consultant. I do cyber stuff. Okay. I'm Aaron Margosis. I do cyber stuff. Been with Microsoft for 16 years. And we're happy to be here, speaking for Mark. Because he wasn't going to say that.
So welcome. We got a few questions to start you guys off. So my first question is, how many folks here use a dedicated account for doing administration at the domain admin level? Separate account from your user account. Awesome. Okay, how many of you use a dedicated separate workstation for those tasks, for the domain admin tasks? Wow. Very cool. About 1/3, I'd say, for the record. Very cool. That is really, really awesome to see. Aaron, you had a few questions?
How many of you have the same local administrative password on all the workstations or all the servers? What's wrong with that? The question from the audience is, what's wrong with that? The rest of you have different passwords on all the local account, like the local built-in admin. You have different passwords on all of them. On the servers. What about the workstations?
That's a different part.
Okay, let's just talk about the workstations. Your standard workstation image has an admin account, either the built-in admin or some other administrative local account. How many of you is the password the same on every single workstation? Still fewer than I expected. Okay. Mm-hmm. How many of you are here because you heard about the local administrator password solution, LAPS, which we just released? Okay. We'll get to it. Excellent.
Cool, thank you. That was very encouraging. We've been doing these pass the hash and credential theft talks for a few years now, and this is the most progress we've ever seen as far as people using those recommended techniques. So awesome, thank you. So we're going to do a very basic kind of story here. This is the threat environment as we see it. Key guidance in new technology, so all the things that apply there, and then strategies, how do you pull it together, and immediate priorities of what is the most important thing to do there. And then Aaron's going to cover the LAPS solution, then we've got a couple of final closing thoughts on the topic. Sound good? All right. So we start with a mindset of assume breach. This does not mean assume your domain admins are already in the hands of, name your favorite countries, attack teams. Some people take it to do that, but assume breach is a mindset. Assume breach means that when I am planning my defenses, when I am planning the various different parts of my network that I care about, starting with the most important parts, like your domain admins, like your high-value business assets that matter. When you look at the defenses of those, you want to make sure you are defending them against attacks from the inside and not the perimeter. Not from just protecting the perimeter and assuming everything on the inside is safe. Assume breach does not stand alone. Assume breach still is a mindset that is added to prevent breach. You still want to prevent breach. You still want to protect the perimeter. You still want to do those kinds of things. It is not necessarily your primary initial focus area. It is not necessarily where you put your investment, but you still do want to provide preventive controls to keep the adversaries from coming in. You don't want to drop your defenses, if that makes sense. So you have to live with both of those. But the thing that's new, that's different for most organizations, is the assume breach mindset. So that's where most of the focus goes. But don't forget the prevent breach is still there. Wow, I'm used to presenting this to folks that haven't done admin desktop. So this is a rare treat for me. So we'll go through some of these fairly quickly. Old world, perimeter thinking. New world, they're in. They're already in the perimeter. They're playing on our desktops, our devices, our laptops, our mobile phones. I'm not going to name any particular operating system flavors on the mobile that happen to be compromised the most, but they're already in, and our data is already out. Our data is, whether it's authorized or not, whether it's on an O365 that's corporate sanctioned and it's out there in the cloud, or whether it's not sanctioned and it's an unauthorized file sharing SaaS service, the data is already out there. The perimeter itself Still useful for protecting against certain things, but it is not the primary means of control. So when we look at a typical attack, how many folks have seen the sort of Microsoft version of it, like myself or Aaron or someone from the Microsoft team talk about this particular attack? How many folks have already seen this? Oh, okay. A couple of new, okay. So we'll go through this fairly quickly. Adversaries today, they go through the research and prep phase. They're looking at LinkedIn. They're looking at Facebook. They're looking at the corporate records of yours that they've already stolen. They're getting context on you. They know who the domain admins are in your environment. They know who the IT admins are. They usually know who the people are that are working on the projects and an intellectual property of interest. So there's a lot of research and prep to get to that first host that they're going to compromise. Usually once they pop that first host, 24 to 48 hours, in a world where there are no admin desktops typically, they have gotten a domain admin. They do this through common local admin passwords, which Aaron is going to demo in a little bit. They do this by stealing the credentials of domain admins, server admins, higher privilege admins that are logging on to those internet browsing hosts where phishing emails are subject to happen, where attacks from malvertising or advertising-based attacks, just normal run-of-the-mill commodity malware. There's a lot of ways that they get on there, mostly phishing. But when those get locked on there, net 24 to 48 hours, they're at the domain admin state. Most cases, the detection numbers are starting to come down a little bit, but it's still roughly around a year before they're detected. Some industries, like the retail industry, where the goods that they steal, essentially the credit card numbers and the like, have a very finite lifetime, they tend to put those out on the black market and monetize them quickly, so their detection rates are a lot, or their detection time is a lot shorter because they usually find it when the credit card numbers are out there and being sold, whereas in other industries where the intellectual property takes a long time before it can be monetized and taken to market, it tends to fall along the longer time frames. So, typical attack, just for review. Adversary usually starts with phishing. It can be any type of attack. But phishing is fairly easy. It's generally very difficult to do attestation on where the source came from just because of the nature of the mail protocols and the like. But we have seen in active use watering hole attacks, where they figure out where your admins like to go, whether it's a system center forum or something of the like, and they go and they find a vulnerability, compromise that, and they wait for your admins to go there because they want you to go there. They will also phish them. They will do any number of different things, but their objective there is to get their first foothold. They want to get that first beachhead on your network. That beachhead has to be a full local compromise. And once they're there, they start collecting creds. They collect local SAM creds. They collect anything from the service accounts typically. And most importantly, they collect them from the LSAS process cache in memory.
The virtual memory of the LSAS process.
Thank you. Aaron is super precise. And so they steal those credentials. And what lives in that LSAS process cache is anything that is logged onto the box that is effectively running a process. Because when you run a process on a box, you have the expectation that when I log into a machine, I'm going to be able to go out to SharePoint to all these various different resources, a file share, to an Exchange server with my Outlook client, and I'm not going to be prompted for Credential. So you have this expectation of seamless single sign-on. The way that Windows does that is by caching your logon credential on your behalf. It's secured, it's encrypted, it's obfuscated, but the bad guys have figured out how we did that, and the system always has to have the access to work it on your behalf, so when they're running as system, they're playing in the same space. So effectively, they steal those creds, be it from the LSAS process cache or from the local SAM database, reuse those, and then they find and they get usually a domain admin cred. At which point, they are sharing control of everything in your environment. Now, what they do with that shared control is up to them. In some places, you guys have seen what happened at Sony, they choose to exercise a destructive plan. That is a very minority case. That is something that I call the 1% case. It's not a precise number, but I call it the 1% case because it happens so rarely. Most of the time, they're out to steal data. So Aaron is going to show a demo focusing on the piece that the lapse tool mitigates.
Yeah. I think you must have done some edit on the slide since this morning because the arrows are all missing. So what you're supposed to see here is when he takes over this machine, there's an arrow saying I had this machine, and I laterally traversed and got this machine. Are you seeing the mouse over there? You're not seeing the mouse. Bloody hell. All right, here we go. So this won't work on the recording, but there's an arrow that goes from here. He took over this machine. Laterally traverse was able to take over this machine. Laterally traverse was able to take over this machine just using local accounts. Sorry, what?
I just drew arrows.
Excellent. Because that saves me the trouble, because the next thing he does is right here is where he got this domain admin ticket, which allowed him to go from here up to the domain controller, and I can't jump that high. So, yeah. So we've done some of these demos where we've shown Windows Credential Editor, Mimikatz, things like that, doing that last bit where it went into the LSAS virtual memory and got the domain admin creds from memory and went up. Today I'm going to show you a demo about how the lateral traversal works. So typical Windows environment, typical Windows network environment, you've got your standard Windows image, you build the base image, and then you clone it out and sysprep it and deploy it, right? So what does that do? So you've got local accounts, at least one, or I guess two. You got the built-in admin and the guest account minimum, and then any other local accounts that you add. When you clone those, the credential store is also being cloned. When you sysprep, the SID of the machine gets updated, gets changed to be something unique. The machine on the domain changes its own password. It manages its own password on the network. But those local accounts stay the same everywhere, which means that anything that has admin rights on that box can go in and retrieve them. Now, there's no documented interface to say, here's where the password hash is for these accounts. But the reverse engineer security experts, like these guys, Marcus and Hussein are here, so really honored that you're here. We'll go in and pull out the hash and then use it in a pass the hash attack. Now, the problem here is because the credential store is on every single machine, admin rights on one box gets the credential that can then take you from machine to machine to machine. Let me just show a demo of what that might look like. So we've got, here's a domain workstation with the domain admin logged on. Here is another workstation where an ordinary user in the domain, user 01, who happens to be admin on this box and only on this box. So this is Win7 x86, and if I try to do a directory listing to Win7 x64 VM $, I'm going to get access denied. I'm admin on this box, but not on the other one. This is very common in a lot of enterprise environments. So let me show you. Let me first show you what else is on the box. So we've got some local accounts. There's an administrator account, built-in administrator. It's disabled. So that can't be used if it's disabled. And that's kind of the default since, I think, Windows Vista and newer. Built-in admin is disabled by default. And then you typically set up another account. In this case, it's Abby. I have this account named Abby. This is my common account across all the machines. This is an active account, and it's a member of administrators, the administrative local account. So let me switch over and do psexec and run this as local system. Just save me a few little steps here. And first, let me show you that from here, I can't get to there from here either. The computer account cannot access that thing. But let's run Mimikatz. and dump the SAM database. Okay, now these accounts haven't been used in forever. It's not like there's a credential hygiene problem where someone's logging in here that shouldn't be. These are just things that are just sitting there. And I've got administrator, guest, Abby, and Toby. These are all local accounts. This is the password hash. So if I go and grab that, and these tools like Mimikatz and Windows Credential Editor make it trivially easy, which is why the problem has gotten so bad. These tools are out there, and any idiot can go out and use them and take over entire corporations with it. I'm going to plug in to this session. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to run a command prompt that has Abby's password hash in the NTLM cache for that process. Okay, so who am I? I'm still NT Authority System. If I do directory win7x64vm $, I have access now, and I can do things like psexec, let's go over there, and let's run, pretend I already got the tool over there, x64 wce.exe-l. And of course, every hacker will read the entire end-user license agreement and have their lawyer go over it and make sure they're not doing anything wrong with regard to sysinternals, although they may be doing something to your favorite corporation.
We assume they do.
And there it is. Oh, is it there yet? You can see it in Process Explorer. It'll take, for some reason, this always takes a long time. There it is. There's psexec service. There's Windows Credential Editor. And here is the hash of the domain administrator account. Using local admin passwords that are common across the entire environment, I can take control of every single machine in the environment. So we have mitigations that we've published in the past. We have a new one, which is Labs, which I'll show you in a little bit. But first, we're going to return to
our regularly scheduled program. So thank you, Aaron. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available. Am I clicking or not? I don't think I'm clicking. Let's try again. Okay, so we got the demo. So we're going to next cover the key guidance and new technology. So we're going to review the key pieces of resources that are out there from a guidance perspective. First, on the mindset of the attackers and how they think that they're objective-driven as opposed to technique-driven. They're not going to go and try and take one particular exploit and see how far they can run with it, like in the Blaster and Slammer days. We're talking about objective-driven organizations. So that's a great resource and a great read on that topic. The Security Intelligence Report, about every 6 months we publish based on the data that we have, not only the data we gather as an anti-malware provider, but also the information we learn through providing email and cleaning and defending that, as well as the search engine pieces and our awareness of the web and all these other various things that we do as a company. We bring that data plus our learnings on our internal network, on our own IT department's learnings, so that you can have a benchmark for how much malware do you guys see, what are the trends, what's coming up, what's going down. Great resource, highly recommend. Like I said, comes out about every 6 months. And then the credential theft portal itself, microsoft.com/pth, is a great resource for the Pass the Hash white papers, as well as a number of different videos and the like that support those and help kind of dive into some of those topics. So how many folks have been attending some of the various different technology pieces where you've seen a lot of the different technology sessions this week? Awesome. So we're going to bring a summary of kind of the ones that we see that are extremely relevant to this space. First is Microsoft Passport. It's a net new protocol. It's based on the FIDO Alliance specifications. It is public key based. It is not symmetric key based like Kerberos is and like NTLM is. So it really changes the game because the same key does not have to be on the domain controller and the workstation as far as what the user types or a mathematical derivation of it. They can and will be different things. So that really changes the game for it. It is a net new protocol, so it has all of the challenges and disadvantages of being a net new protocol, and that you need the app support and the support through there. Azure AD out of the gates will support it as Windows 10 is released, as will I'm not sure if they're going to port it back to the current versions of AD. I assume they will, but I do not know that for sure. I do know that the new versions of on-premises AD will also support it, so we're really bought into this across the company. And the other piece that just makes it easier to log in is the Windows Hello. Really easy to use biometrics that enable you to essentially unlock the private keys for those, or rather unlock the usage of the private keys of those, and that is hardware-bound TPM types of credentials. So those are very, very closely related initiatives. Privileged access management, just-in-time privileges. There's a set of capabilities that come from two different places. One is Microsoft Identity Manager, or MIM. That is the new version of the Forefront Identity Manager product, and that allows you to have workflows that determine when and where you should have you get privileges and credentials. There are also hooks and support within the Active Directory infrastructure that enable those scenarios to work well, including limiting the Kerberos lifetimes to the shortest privilege that you have at the time, so that those tickets cannot live beyond and those privileges cannot live in the tickets beyond when they're supposed to. So some innovation there coming on the directory side as well. Advanced threat analytics, absolutely great tools for detecting pass the hash and other anomalous behaviors. Great ability to learn what's happening in your environment, to identify anomalies in your specific environment. Very, very, very impressed with this technology and really looking forward to the kinds of things we're going to be able to do with that. And then isolated user mode. How many folks here have heard anything about this? Cool. So we've got a couple slides in there to detail it out. This is for all the first pieces. This is as much as we're going to talk about in this session. But the isolated user mode, I've been talking with Nathan Ide, who is one of our lead developers in the Windows group, that's to make sure we had some details for you guys on this. So this is very cool, because it uses the existing NTLM and Kerberos protocol, so you don't have to go through that whole protocol transition piece and all of the app compat and all the challenges with it to get the benefits of it. And what it does is it sets up what's called an isolated user mode that essentially hosts all of these sensitive LSAS functions. And it's hosted in a virtual secure mode, or VSM, very tiny OS that is very special purpose and only runs a very specific small set of signed code. So it's not a general purpose OS with drivers and applications and all that. It is a very specific module that runs a very small piece of Windows, the minimum pieces of it, as well as these trustlets, they call them, one of which is the isolated user mode that stores those sensitive parts of the local security authority process, the creds. So, strict signing, strong isolation, building block. So this is the key, the VSM piece and the VSM technology and its ability to essentially be bound to the boot process and the boot integrity pieces that make sure that signed code runs. That is where the foundation of all those security promises are. So when you look at this conceptually and take the next step, right now we've got essentially secrets in the clear, although they're encrypted and obfuscated, they have been found, that live in the high-level OS, the standard issue OS. What happens in a Windows 10 piece when you turn this feature on is those clear secrets no longer get used in the high-level OS, so it does not have access to them. Those secrets are in this isolated user mode that has all those various protections on it, which the hypervisor is doing that hypervisor, essentially hardware virtualization-based separation. And in many ways, that isolated user mode, it's the term that they use is an oracle because it answers questions, it never gives you the secrets. And so essentially The high-level OS that's interacting with your domain controllers and doing the authentication is asking it to perform operations. It cannot get the key from it. Make sense? So we're security guys, right? So we're never going to tell you it's perfect. The benefits is that it breaks all the current credential tool sets, and it uses the current protocols. So it really changes the game on the clients and makes those credentials much, much, much harder to steal. Doesn't mean that there aren't other attacks. There are possibilities. So if I own the box, I can still do impersonation. I can run whatever code I want as the person that's on the box, and I can do it because I still own that box. I can still ask the Oracle to perform those functions on my behalf. And of course, if you steal them from the DC, they're still valid. Symmetric key. And then, technically, you still can attack the firmware, the UEFI, the IUM itself, if there's an unpatched vulnerability or an undiscovered vulnerability in there, and side channel and all the standard issue hardware attacks that are not scalable over the network typically. Questions on that? All right. So pulling all these things into a strategy. When we look at building a strategy to defend against credential theft, we use the tier model. How many folks here have seen this before? Cool. We published this in the version 2 of the Pass the Hash white paper. Tier 0 controls everything. Tier 1 is an admin that's in control of an enterprise service or an asset that's in control of one or more, typically all, enterprise services. That could be a cloud service. That could be an on-premise set of servers. It could be many different things. It's generally those assets that have a high value of data and multiple users using them. Tier 2, individual user devices. All of these have a high business impact. If I get your help desk and I have control over every single workstation, I technically have the ability to get any piece of data I want on the network. I just have to chase it down over a lot of places. If I control your server admins as an attacker, it's a lot easier for me to get access to it. If I control domain admins, I have implicit rights to everything. So from a business impact perspective, that's not why we divide these up. This is a very technical lens. The reason that we look through this technical lens for this first stage of defending against these types of attacks is because it's useful to create that buffer zone between a help desk admin versus a server versus a domain admin, because we do not want the loss of any of those to automatically lead to a higher tier. Once we pass this stage and we're at the point where we have our admin credentials under control, we need to look at the assets through a business lens. Because the reason I care about a domain admin, you put up a lab, right? You put up a small DC, DC and a couple of workstations like Aaron's got on his box. You don't care about it. You care about it because it's in control of the business assets that matter. And so once we pass this stage where we need to get rid of these immediate problems, the very next thing that we have to worry about is when I start looking at hardening those apps and those servers and those workstations and devices, I want to look at the most valuable assets that my company has, map out the life cycle of those assets and where does it live, and how do I protect where that asset is at all times. So this is a technical lens and we have to use it first, but as soon as we're done with this, we have to shift to a business-driven lens. We're going to use a lot of the techniques and learnings there, but we do have to shift. So with that said, when we look at the elevation of privilege piece, we want to look at credential theft, application agent, service accounts. We want to make sure that those lower tiers, through any means possible, not just credentials, but any means, can make their way up there. Cannot make their way up from a lower tier to a higher tier. And then where Labs fits in is that lateral traversal piece. We want to make sure that through a local account, they can't automatically traverse. Through a domain account, they can't traverse. And through any configuration of applications and services, they also cannot laterally traverse. So the way we think about the lateral traversal piece on the credential theft piece is that a local account is automatically available. As you saw with Aaron's, doesn't matter how long you've used it, if it's the same password, automatically used. The domain accounts, They might be there. They might not be there. But you can always get them there as an attacker. We have actually seen in actual practice an attacker luring a help desk because they wanted his cred. So they go, they're on a box, they can't get anywhere. So what they do is they create an issue, cause something to crash, user calls a help desk logs on, bad guy steals his creds. So that does happen, and that's why we worry about the domain accounts that are used for support as well as the local accounts. So the next thing when we're building the strategies that we really think about very closely, and this is directly derived off the assumed breach, is you have to assume you're in a hostile environment that's being attacked all the time. You can't just protect. You have to detect, you have to respond, you have to recover from those attacks as quickly as possible. I skipped identify. Identify ties back into those business. One, you have to know your capability. You have to know yourself. Like Sun Tzu says, you have to know yourself and know your enemy. You do not fear the outcome of hundreds of battles. You have to understand that, but you also have to understand what are the high-value assets you're protecting and what matters as you build a complete strategy. So when we look at the preventive controls and those key pieces of it, we took a look, as we were preparing for this presentation, at the original 3 mitigations in the Pass the Hash white paper version 1. Pass the Hash version 1 answered the question, what is Pass the Hash and what do I do about it now? Version 2 answered, how do I strategically put this together and integrate the newest technology, which at the time was Windows 8.1 and 2012 R2. So we revisited that and we asked ourselves, with the release of LAPS and these various other pieces, what would be our recommendations? What would be our answer to the question of Pass the Hash version 1 now? And the answer was, mitigation 1 does not change. Admin workstations, logon restrictions, to put those escalations of privilege, that stays in place, absolutely there, very strongly stand behind it. Mitigation 2, all of the mitigations there's a bunch of choices to mitigate that lateral traversal with the local accounts. That still stands, but given the ease of use of the LAPS tool and how effective it is to have random passwords and the fact that it's freely available, that one rose to the top. And so randomizing those passwords on workstations, on servers, if you're in retail, your cash registers, if you're in banking, your ATMs, you want to make sure that those are unique random passwords. There are third-party products on the market, and there are very, very capable, very nice ones. We now have a free tool in the event that you don't have those. And then the last piece, and this closes the gap, and it was something that was very difficult for us to mitigate without this technology. Mitigation 3, if you guys recall, in the Pass the Hash white paper, said to put up firewalls on your clients. And that was the way we could mitigate the domain accounts being stolen and reused, so that if you stole those domain accounts, you couldn't go peer-to-peer from workstation to workstation. It wasn't the greatest mitigation, but it was what was available and what was freely there. Since that time, the RDP restricted admin mode that was released in Windows 8.1 and 2012 R2, and it's in the product from then on. And it was also backported. So as of October of 2014, they finished backporting all of the pieces of RDP restricted admin mode to Windows 7 and later, and Windows 2008 R2 and later. So on the server and client side, you can RDP with restricted admin mode to and from clients and servers. And so we recommend that for servers.
Let's define what that means, restricted admin.
Yep.
How many of you are familiar with restricted admin mode in, okay, this deserves definition.
Okay. So restricted admin mode, Aaron, keep me honest. What it does is it allows you to have an RDP session. So say I'm supporting a Windows 7 client from another Windows 7 client, to use the oldest example. I can connect to that as a help desk doing support, and I can do that with a full RDP experience that looks, feels, and smells and is a normal RDP session that is very familiar to these guys doing the support. But instead of placing, when I do that, my credentials on the remote machine I'm managing, so if I'm a help desk guy and I'm supporting Aaron, my user that keeps clicking on phishing emails, when I access his box, I'm worried about him or someone that controls his box stealing my credentials. So with the restricted admin mode, I can get that full experience to manage his machine without having to worry about that, because I do a network authentication to him instead of a traditional RDP authentication, and then it converts that network authentication token to a full local token, and I've never given my credentials to Aaron's machine. So very, very powerful tool, because even if they lure the help desk there, the help desk does not give up the creds to the potentially compromised machine, whether it's help desk or server or any administration like that. So it allows you to do that last mile of RDP authentication without the risk of losing control of admin that is generally applicable to all the rest. Was there some questions on it? If you guys come up to the mics when you have a question. So RDP with restricted admin mode, from our perspective, closes the last gap in the strategy, which is those domain accounts and the lateral traversal, which is a significant problem. Go ahead.
Is that as simple as just running /restricted admin on the end of
MSTSC.
Yeah, MSTSC, or is there something more to it?
That is one way of doing it. We actually prefer on your admin desktops to put a GPO in place. It's detailed on some of the information for it when we have actually a little more slides on these. And it details how to set the GPO at that documentation to ensure that it always uses that mode when it connects.
Right. You also have to enable it on the remote machine as well, right?
Yes, you do have to enable it on the RDP session host, so the server side of the connection that you're connecting to.
The machine you're connecting to needs to enable that too, right? So,
yeah.
So we use remote assistance much more than remote desktop. Is there similar technology there? Or?
It's similar in the sense that it's using terminal services, but other than that, remote assistance, you're not putting your creds on the remote machine.
So that's not really applicable.
So think of it this way. Your remote assistance is like you go to their workstation, they're logged in, and they're saying, how do I do this? And you say, here, like this, and you take the keyboard. You're not typing in your creds, you're working within their session. Right? Remote desktop means you get your own logon session, right? Run as puts your credentials at risk because you type them in.
Yeah, when you think of a typical help desk, there's two things that they support, even though they're seen as one and the same in many cases. You're supporting users, which is where do I click, which you don't need admin creds of the box. You're just looking at what they're seeing and telling them where to click. And then supporting the workstation, like, hey, there's a driver broken, there's a piece of software broken, and that's where you need the admin rights to do it. This addresses the risky scenario of the admin rights with restricted admin mode. The user support piece, you just use remote assistance or a similar tool, and you're already good to go. There's no risk there as long as you're not, typing in the admin creds in the user session.
Isn't it correct that you should primarily use this when you go from a high privileged account to a not so protected PC? Because when you go to a server, for example, and you use this, you can actually use the pass-the hash to get a remote session against the server.
We recommend it for both the workstation support as well as server support. So both of them should have admin desktops that have the GPO that makes sure that they're using restricted admin when they do their connections.
But you disabled it with a knowledge base article a little later.
Yes, you have to turn on
the beginnings.
You have to turn on the capability on the server side. So on the managed workstation.
Disable it as default instead of enabling it from default. Wasn't that because that it actually was a way to use the pass-the-hash attack against servers?
Yes,
that's
so
exactly why.
when we first shipped the feature, there was a setting that effectively, when we shipped it, it was turned on by default instead of off by default. And that created the risk that because it's a network connection coming in, you could actually use a hash to authenticate. You wouldn't have to have the original credential. If someone's got a hash and they're determined to get you, they're probably going to crack it into a password anyway. So it was one of those things that we didn't quite catch. It is better to turn it off, and that's why we changed that default when we did the backport.
The other part of that problem also is if they have the hash, they can get in using a network authentication, doing that use through CDollar, remote registry, the service control manager, whatever. So this just gave them an additional ability to have an interactive session, but it didn't actually increase the risk. But this is a least privileged type of thing. Do you need it? If so, turn it on, right?
Yep.
Rather than turning it on for everybody all the time.
So I can use restricted admin mode via group policy. Can I also enable whatever needs to be enabled on the host to use that via group policy?
No, because the control of whether you send the credential to this potentially compromised host lies on the client, because the client is the one that has the creds and chooses whether or not to share them with the server. If you tell the server don't accept it, well, it's getting it from the client, and if it's a compromised host, it can steal them in some form or fashion. It would have to be a new tool, but the control is and should be at the RDP client base where the credentials are typed in or entered.
Okay. So is there any reason, so this is something that you recommend using for pretty much the whole
For supporting
domain?
things like going from high trust to low trust. So
Okay.
I am supporting a workstation, and I don't trust this workstation not to steal my creds that can manage every workstation. That's when you use restricted admin mode.
Is there any drawback to using it for connecting to anything? Yeah.
If it's not good for user functions, you have to be an admin on the remote box. So that's one of the requirements. You do have to be
Okay.
an admin on the remote box.
Okay.
Because what you're doing when you get to that other end, by default, you can turn it off, is when you leave the box to go somewhere else, it's not going to use your creds because it doesn't have them. It's going to use the machine's creds.
Okay.
So it's really designed for that administration scenario. It is not a user-driven feature.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
And there's also a special bonus in that if you're already logged in as that admin, because it's a network logon, you don't even have to type your creds. So it's actually even nicer for the help desk guys to do their job.
Getting back on the pass the hash, is there any way that you can run a command or a script that would facilitate the ability to be able to clear those hash passwords on the operating system?
So the answer is it already does that for you. One of the other pieces that was changed in 8.1 and R2 that was in 2012 R2 that was backported was when you hit log off, the operating system used to be polite and wait for all the apps to close before it cleared the credentials for that user. It is no longer polite. As soon as the user says log off, it does a very short timeout, I want to say 30 seconds, and then it clears the cache. It does not wait for an app, it doesn't care. So when the user indicates they don't want to be there after that session's over, the credentials are cleared.
And you're referring to restricted admin mode, right? I was actually referring to just in a pass the hash scenario.
Yes.
Right,
Say,
so-
with a Windows 2008 and prior version of the operating system. Or
So
the
what would
workstation.
happen is you'd have services running. It wasn't so much processes because those would always get shut down, but you've got a services running that holds on to a token from your logon session, and it will stay there until you reboot. What Mark was talking about is the new changes in there. When the interactive session is logged off, it goes through and forces the entire LSA session down. So if a service is still holding onto a token, that token is just invalid at that point. So
And this is
it does
generally
do
across
that,
the
but
operating
it doesn't. There's no way if you remain logged in. There's no way to clear out the hashes, and there's no reason to do that because they're there so that you can authenticate.
And this is a general operating system feature. It has nothing to do with the restricted admin mode. It just
Right.
happened to be released at the same time with 8.1 and R2 and backported all the way back to 7 and 2008 R2 and later.
So we can actually use kind of RDP, restricted admin mode, as a method of clearing cache credentials on, like, let's say domain controllers, right?
Per session, not for everybody that's logged in.
Yeah, I was actually referring to just all the hashes that are cached in memory on the operating system itself.
So on the domain controller, it already has a copy on disk of those. So if you've lost the DC, you've lost everything. That's why we don't necessarily recommend restricted admin mode at the domain admin level, because all of those assets in tier 0, they're homogeneous. Every single one is in control of everything else, including each other. So we don't worry about restricted admin mode at the domain admin level so much. You can do it. But at the tier 1 and tier 2 level is where we really recommend this, which is server admins, workstation admins.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
All right, let's move forward.
Yep. So we got a couple of these that have a little bit more depth, and just to remind you, please do these now. These are the things that are available. No cost, actually, other than normal Windows licensing stuff. This is the free stuff that we want you to do absolutely now as soon as you can. So the workstations and logon restrictions, same reasoning as ever, in that we want to stop that escalation of privilege. We have very detailed instructions in the version 1 white paper. For those of you that have not read it, please do. And then there is actually, for Azure management, the Azure team has released instructions on how to build an admin workstation for Azure. So you can have as secure of an admin workstation as you can there. So that's also a very nice resource as we get into managing cloud services from these admin workstations. Labs piece, Aaron's going to cover in depth, so I'll skip that. And then the RDP restricted admin, I think we have worked through quite a bit, and that is the source of information for most of the details on that and how to make sure it's turned on and the like. So now we're kind of getting to some of the stuff that we do as a services practice and how we approach it when we're asked by a very large enterprise customer, how should we be essentially getting a turnkey solution? How do we get to the point where this is done? Not so much just a quick win piece of it and getting the basics across, but what does a comprehensive strategy look like? And it is people, process, and technology. So we have a consulting arm that does ITIL and IT process management and design and overhaul. And we bring them in with our technology architects and work together to help make sure all of these various pieces come together, because we want to make sure, one of the big learnings we've seen with our technical reference architectures was the pain points after running these for a couple of years were around the IT processes and how to make sure that those admins were really enabled and empowered and knew what the right thing to do was in all these different various circumstances. They were process issues. They were people issues. They were not technology issues that they were facing. So obviously we always start with those the tier model piece and the escalation of privilege. And when we do a project, we generally start with the admin roles and delegation if we have the time to do so, because we found that when you start understanding your roles and you design them right, all of the other stuff tends to flow, like who gets an admin workstation, who has dynamic privileges, and who has static privileges, which ones are a break glass process that has to go through a set of physical controls. And planning those from a role basis is really what brings all the pieces together and makes it into one coherent system. The admin forest. So we set up the admin forest, or the enhanced security admin environment, or ESAE in our world. And that is actually detailed. We've got a couple pages on it at the end of the Pass the Hash version 2 white paper that describes how we do that and all the various technical controls we have in it. And that is for the domain admins, and that is really to protect them with it. And many of our customers do not greenfield and do not start with a known good Active Directory for their production, and so they want to have something that has a known good root of trust to host those admin workstations so that they stay known good, and that's where the admin forest architecture comes from. It also gives you a nice technical controls or technical enforcement of governance, and so that's something that we really like as well, that allows you to make sure that those domain admins and the like are they are not able to affect themselves or their peers administratively. So we take those and we demote them down to users in the admin forest, so they cannot affect that environment. They can only affect the production environment. There we go. And then, because credential theft does not solve all your problems, because there are applications and services and management tools and all these other threat vectors, including configurations and other pieces that could allow a compromise of a domain or a domain controller that would have the same net effect as stealing the domain admin credentials. We do what we call app and service hardening, or operating system app and service hardening, and we focus first on the tier 0 pieces, and then we also apply that again in the business priority level to the tier 1 and tier 2 assets. And so if you want more information on that session, there was a modern hardening session that is recorded for the Ignite here that we presented this morning that has a lot of detail on what we do there and how we address those tier 0 risks at that level. Admin workstations for tier 1 and tier 2, we want to make sure that all of those privileged admins have a known good workstation to work from, so they do not have to worry about the phishing and the web attacks taking over and stealing their credentials, and they have this safe place to work from for both of those. Then we want temporary credentials. We want tracked credentials. We want to know where these privileges are being used. We want the ability to say yes or no, or to auto-approve. And so we have And we're getting ready to update this to the MIM piece. We actually built a reference architecture called Mars on the FIM platform that allows you to dynamically request privileges. There are others on the market that do this effectively. Lieberman, CyberArk, Thycotic, I think Beyond Trust even has an offering on it. There's a lot of dynamic privilege offerings that are out there. We've built one on the FIM platform as well. And the MIM platform is becoming a native go-to-market capability that's coming out with the next version. So that temporary privileges and, more importantly, the track privileges, so you know who asked for privileges when, is a very key aspect to this. It's not a preventive control that's as powerful as the admin workstations, so we do recommend starting with the admin workstations. But the PAM piece adds a very key aspect to it to get your admin rights under control. And then, of course, the lateral traversal mitigations are a key part of that, which leverages that RDP restricted admin piece. And then this is something we haven't implemented a whole lot. We've had a couple of reference implementations. If you can get to Kerberos only, you can use protected users. So if your admins do not require Kerberos to perform their, do not require NTLM to perform their jobs, they can use the protected users feature in 2012 R2 to essentially have Kerberos only and only the strongest pre-auth in Kerberos. And then once you have them at that Kerberos level, you can enforce Kerberos policies to strengthen the controls on where they can and cannot log in using authentication policies and silos. So if you can pass that bar and get to Kerberos only, it's a very, very powerful feature. And it's something that also combines well with the IUM piece to get you a combined set of assurances. Questions?
Actually, I have a couple of questions. First of all, creating these tiers, what is the practical method of doing that? Is it like actual firewall zones, or is it IPsec policies, or is it like Windows firewalls, or how do you actually create these tiers?
Excellent question. So what those are at the basic level is logon restrictions, that the higher tier credentials cannot log on to the lower tier managed boxes. So as a domain admin, I am not able to log on to a standard server or to a workstation because the group policy on those lower tier machines says I'm not able to log on.
Like log on interactively and access this machine from the computer?
All the logon rights, correct. And so from that perspective, that's what does it. The reason we like authentication silos much better than the logon restrictions, the group policy logon restrictions, is because they enforce it at the domain controller level. When we do the admin force, we actually use a trust feature called selective authentication to make sure that the accounts coming from the admin force cannot log on, enforced at the DC, to those lower tiers. Group policy is all we have for the other ones that are not coming across the forest trust until we get off policies and silos. That allows us to move those controls to the DC, not to the potentially compromised workstation.
Okay. I see the dotted lines here. Do they actually mean any physical, restrictions, or they're just logon restrictions that you mentioned? Like I'm just thinking about, firewalls and things.
So we don't put firewalls in place. This is, when you think of a containment and segmentation strategy, you have to have everything lined up. Your identity, your apps, your network, all of those things to have a segmentation strategy have to be lined up. Most security departments just think purely networking and throw a firewall in it. And quite frankly, that's ineffective if you have the same domain and identity and everything else crossing over it. The firewalls don't mean much. And so from that perspective, within a segmentation zone, within typically a forest zone, which is what we would recommend, there aren't going to be firewalls between those, because when I log in to get my group policy, I'm going to need to talk to the DCs and do a network logon. When I need to access a server, I'm going to need to access that server. So firewalls don't really help you there. This is more of an identity level, authentication level restriction.
What about these lateral movements? How do you suggest preventing those through firewalls?
So that's where the LAPS tool comes in, which Aaron is going to cover. That's our primary recommendation. We can technically do it with firewalls by preventing peer-to-peer traffic, but there's also logon restrictions as well and a few other features that are all detailed in the Pass the Hash version 1 white paper.
Just last question about the the admin forest here.
Yep.
I'm assuming that there are two for it. So I'm assuming that you'll have one-way trust here? To be able to
One-way
manage?
trust, we trust the admin forest, it does not trust us.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because I want to make sure Aaron has, oh,
I
Go
can
ahead.
ask later. It's a kind of I think it's a quick question. So, can you touch on the GPO about the number of cache logons to keep on a system, and is that
sure.
so?
Yeah.
That's in the
Actually, no.
registry, right? So,
The cache logons thing is not a security concern, but we're going to run out of time if we dive
Yeah,
into it.
that setting has nothing to do with pass the hash.
Right.
Completely nothing. And we can cover that later. So when we look at these, tier 0, separate admin desktop, separate admin accounts, remove as many accounts as you can from tier 0 as possible, service and personnel accounts. You should only be doing DC maintenance, delegation and AD, and forest maintenance with domain admin and tier 0 level stuff. You should not be doing day-to-day OU admins or anything else with your domain admin rights. Better is you're going to be adding detection, multi-factor authentication, just-in-time privileges, and you're going to want to get a detailed and extensive overhaul of your IT processes as opposed to the brief ones that you had to do to get the admin desktops in place. Best is you have an admin forest to protect those AD admin roles, IUM, and Microsoft Passport. The darker ones you get are not yet immediately available. When you look at Tier 1, those server administrations, again, separate admin accounts and desktops, including the process changes, which should include the use of that RDP restricted admin mode and the lapse tool. And you can also use an alternate from the PTHV1 white paper instead of that. Better, very similar, detection, multi-factor, just-in-time, and that extensive overhaul of the processes and roles, and then IUM, and then the Microsoft Passport and Windows Hello when available, when compatible. Tier 2, did you notice nothing changed? I think we're good. And I will now turn it over to Aaron.
So we talked a lot about the lateral traversal problem, and as Mark mentioned, we have had mitigations for that for a while that you can apply. So for example, user account control, enforce the restrictions in there that say if you authenticate using a local account, it's going to be stripped, it's going to be treated as a standard user account. You won't be able to do remote administration as long as you keep the UAC policies in place. Another thing that we released with 8.1 and then backported to Windows 7 and 2008 R2 and newer you're able to define all local accounts as a single entity. There's a well-known SID, and you can apply logon restrictions against all local accounts or all administrative local accounts. Local accounts are a member of the administrators group. You use those policies, that lateral traversal breaks right away. There was another thing we recommended, and that was randomize the passwords or do something to make the passwords unique. And that's where we didn't have anything to really help you out with that. And now we finally do. This is a solution that was developed by Yuri Formacek, who is a principal consultant with Microsoft Consulting Services in the Czech Republic. And he came out with this thing, and we all looked at it, and I thought it was the most brilliant and elegant solution to this problem I'd ever seen. And we convinced TWC to release it to the world. So how does it work? Well, what does it do? First of all, it puts a different random password on each computer. Where does it get the password from? There's no central password generator server pushing passwords out. Each computer manages its own local account. Where do you put it? A SQL server, a file share, you need to set the permissions so that people can write into it, but they can't overwrite others, et cetera, et cetera. No, he came up with the idea of using Active Directory, and I believe BitLocker and MBAM use a very similar type of thing, where you make a schema extension to Active Directory to add a couple of attributes on the computer object. So every computer object has the information for that computer. So there's no central database or file server you need to manage and set permissions on. It's all managed through group policy. You can specify either use the built-in admin, the -500 account, whether it's been renamed or not, or specify the name of the account that you have. You can specify how often passwords should be updated. You can specify the complexity and the length and some other things as well. And it's free. So this is the part I like. I think this will help with adoption. And the thing that excites me about it is this is a very simple, elegant solution that can save people a lot of trouble, and this will help them deploy it. What we did is we looked at EMIT, the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit, and saw how they were doing it in terms of distribution and support. And we decided, we got TWC to do basically the same thing with LAPS. So how does it work at a more detailed level? It uses a group policy client-side extension. So a piece of C++ code that's hooked into WinLogon, and whenever group policy refreshes, it checks to see, do I need to change my password? If so, generate a new random password, verify, and this is one of the new features that was added recently, verify that it actually matches the password policy, whether that be length, complexity, if you have a custom password filter, there's an API that it actually calls to verify that. It then sets the password in Active Directory and then sets it locally. So if it loses connectivity to Active Directory, it won't change the password. It writes it to Active Directory first. And storing it in Active Directory, what we do is we have a confidential attribute. What that means is it is only readable by domain admins. It's writable by the computer account itself. So each computer can write to its own computer object into this attribute. Interesting, okay, it's still working good. It cannot read it back. It can write to it but not read it back. Domain admins can read it, and domain admins can grant access to some other designated group or user or whatever. Help desk admins can read this property. There's also a separate one for the timestamp. So when the component writes the password, it also writes when it needs to update it based on the group policy specifying 30 days out. It sets a date 30 days out. There's a permission on that allows the domain admin can allow some user group like help desk admins to reset that and force a password change at the next group policy refresh. This is the installation. It's an MSI. On the client, all you need to do is install the, I can't read, it's really tiny, ADM GPO extension. That's it. It has no further dependencies. You don't need a C++ runtime or anything like that. That's all you need to install on the clients, on the managed clients. For the management piece, don't install the GPO extension on your domain controller, but you can install the management tools. This requires .NET 4, and so if you're running on 2008 R2, for example, and you have PowerShell 2, you need to add a PowerShell.exe.config file to allow PowerShell to use .NET 4 or .NET 2. But then there's a fat client UI, there's the PowerShell module in here, and GPO editor templates so that you can set things in group policy. Here's what it looks like in PowerShell when you set it up. You import the module, ADM pwd.ps, and this adds a bunch of commandlets that allow you to configure everything, get everything set up, and then to manage the system, retrieve passwords, force a reset, etc. The next thing you do is update the schema, and here's where it's adding 2 new attributes and associating them with the computer object. So every computer object has this now optional attribute, or a pair of attributes with permission set so that the password one is confidential. You then have to do this. Specify, you have to set the permissions on it so that itself, each computer object, can manage its own admin password. And it's a very simple command to do that. You have to specify the OU or the computer, or the container rather, to do this. And then you grant access. And this is one way to do it. Set ADM pwd read password permission. Specify the OU or container, or you could do it on a computer by computer basis if you wanted to, and then specify the Active Directory group that you want to grant access to. That's basically it. And then you've got the group policy component, which includes password settings, which is complexity, length, how often to rotate the passwords, name of the administrator account to manage. There's something in here also that helps deconflict if you have the actual password expiration policy. If it specifies something that is shorter than what you specify in this setting, this will tell it ignore this group policy setting and go with the one on the actual machine. And then the master switch, enable local admin password management. You turn that on, and now all the client-side extensions start doing their work. To retrieve a password, there's a couple different ways to do it. One is with a WinForms client. Again, this requires .NET 4. You just type in the computer name, and you retrieve it. You get back the password and the expiration time. There's also something where you can specify a new expiration time, force an immediate expiration, or set it to anything you want. You can also do it through PowerShell. I'll show a demo here in just a second. These are the links. We've got a security advisory, knowledge base article, the download link, and Yuri Formacek has just created a new blog, blogs.msdn.com LAPS. Quick demo. So here we are in this environment that's been messed up. We go in, we'll enable this. We don't actually need to enable this because these are the defaults. Password length 14, password age maximum 30 or minimum 30 days, and this level of complexity. We need to specify the account name. We can skip this, and we turn this on, and done. Now the next part of the demo, we wait for group policy to refresh. I'm kidding. And we wait for group policy to refresh, like I said. Okay, and now here we go, and let's see now if I can get in. No, logon failure, unknown username, or bad password. And that's actually, I still have the old one in there, but if I go in and try to do it, go through those steps again, it's going to fail anyway because now they have different passwords. And if I go to the Win8 button, so here's my management machine. And I'll do get ADM PWD password for that machine. Now see, here's the password, here's the expiration time. And here's the Laps UI. x64 VM, search, same password, right? Yep. And watch, I'm going to try to set it, and I'm going to get failed to request password reset. That's because I granted access to this help desk admin to read the password, but not to force a reset. So it's a separate permission. So that is Laps. Any questions? And I know what the first question is going to be, but ask it.
Multi-domain support. So can you, from either the GUI or PowerShell, can you query computers in another domain from your admin?
Yeah, you can specify the full name. Okay. Yeah. So let me answer one question I know is coming. Is someone want to know, is it in the clear? Someone going to ask that? Is it
in the clear?
No one cares? No one cares? Okay, skip it. No one's interested. I thought it'd be a big topic, but no? Okay. Is it? No, it's not. It's in the clear. It's not encrypted.
What operating systems is that supported on?
So the support here is everything we currently support, Vista and newer, and 2003 and newer. And we did not deliberately break XP, but that API I told you about where we validate the password against the password policy, that API does not exist on XP. So when that got added, which we felt was important, we broke XP. Workstation and server. Yeah. I'm sorry, Server 2000, yeah, Server 2003 and newer, Vista and newer on the client.
So real quick before we hit any more questions, I just want to cover, before you guys ever log in with domain admin again, we'd ask you to implement those mitigations, admin workstations, LAPS, RDP, revamp your culture and support processes. Make sure your admins know about this and know about how important these things are and why. And of course, start thinking about those features. So with that, we'll take some questions, and thank you very much.
I was wondering, again, on the permissions, we have thousands of computer objects distributed amongst delegated OUs. So can I set that based on the OU admins group that we've already delegated, or maybe the computer owner?
You saw that. If you can run that command and specify for this OU, grant it to this account, for this OU, grant it to this other group, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Can I use AD groups as opposed to can I even use, say, the creator owner ACE, or is that supported?
No, creator owner won't work in that.
Okay,
that.
So it does have to specify an actual.
Yeah, creator owner. Get me later.
Weird,
I'll explain creator owner. It's it's.
I figured that was weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, just a public service announcement. I'm sure everyone here already knows this, but just for anyone watching the video or that maybe just could use a little bit of help. When you're deploying your Windows image, please, for the love of everything sacred and holy, make sure you scramble the SID.
I couldn't hear you.
Scramble your SIDs when you're deploying Windows.
Scramble your SIDs?
The sysprep.
Sysprep?
Yeah.
Yes. Definitely use sysprep. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Sysprep is the only supported way to clone a machine.
So with LAPS, if you have users who work in the field and only ever connect up via VPN. So I mean, obviously the password at some point the computer account will reset its password. What happens if it tries to reset the local admin password if it's not connected to the VPN?
If it's not connected, it won't be able to check the date.
Okay.
It's not going to be able to read the date attribute. So if you're not connected for months, that password's not going to get updated.
Right.
Right? As soon as it does and group policy refreshes, it's going to do it right away.
Okay, so it's only going to do it if it knows the date is expired and it's currently connected to the domain to know that it's time to.
Exactly, and it's not going to do it until it can write the new password into Active Directory. Yeah.
So can you specify multiple admin accounts or non-admin accounts? I'm just asking, like, if you have multiple accounts.
Can you get closer to the microphone? I'm sorry.
Sorry. If you have multiple accounts, local accounts.
Multiple local accounts.
Yeah. Can you?
This handles one account.
Just one account.
Just one. This version, because the vast majority of deployments that I've seen, you don't have multiple administrative local accounts.
Thank you.
You can deploy separate. Can you deploy separate group policies though to target separate accounts?
No, because the group policy is going to go in one registry location. Yeah.
Two questions. First is, will it cope with international localizations which have a difference in the name of the built-in administrator? Does it just go after the well-known SID?
Great question. So yeah, by default, if you don't specify a name, then it's going to take whatever the -500 account is and manage that account. So if you have administrator, administrator, whatever it is in Italian, whatever it is in Swedish, etc., the -500 account, it'll work that out if you don't specify a name. If you specify a name, it's got to be that name.
And thank you. And the second question is, what precautions do you recommend on the separate admin workstation?
The separate,
So the specific configurations for it are detailed in the version 2 white paper. We did a very basic one just with known good media in the version 1. Version 2, we actually detailed out all the controls we do in our reference architecture when we work with customers.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Question?
Quick question for the temporary password option in MIM. What version, when did you expect that to be added in? You commented it was coming, but not when.
There is actually literally right next door, Mark Wall, W-A-H-L, just did a session on that very topic. So if you check the Channel 9 website, you can get all those details from them. I'm not with the product group, so I'm not going to make a guess on their behalf.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question. In the slides, you separated administrative forest and the production forest, right? What's the reason you separated it into two forests? Why not domain? Because it's a security boundary, the forest?
So, great question. The forest is a security boundary.
Yes.
And if we assume that your domain might be compromised, your existing forest, we don't get any assurance by adding another domain to an already compromised forest.
But there have to be a trust in any way in order to manage the other forest. So isn't it a probability? Or
It's a one-way trust with selective authentication. So only the red forest or the admin forest accounts can authenticate to production. Production cannot access the admin forest.
Exactly which accounts should reside in management domain? Management forest, sorry.
So we only provision the domain admins in there. We had a lot of app compat issues when we tried to manage other accounts. They just don't, other applications rather, they don't like to be managed generally by an external forest account. So we had a lot of app compat issues. And that's in our reference architectures using MIM and the current AD, and FIM and the current AD rather. In the MIM era, where they have also embraced the admin forest architecture, they are adding features in the forest trusts, in the trusts themselves, forest and domain trusts, that allow them to impersonate the groups that are already in the production environment. So with product changes, they're able to do a lot more things than we are able to in the current version of the product in terms of being able to traverse that trust and manage those existing apps.
Okay, then all the production servers and clients should reside in a production forest.
Yes.
And only the admin or enterprise admin accounts should reside in management forest, right?
Correct. And this is described in the Pass-a-Hash version 2. The last couple of pages of it, I think it's 2 or 3 pages of that document, cover that admin forest and what goes into it. But right now it's only domain admins. When the new version of Windows Server comes out, we're going to have a lot more flexibility to impersonate what's in production so we don't have those same limitations.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quick question. Will you be posting these slides to the Ignite
Yes, these will
session?
be posted up like any standard session, so you can get all the slides from
He
there.
was editing them right up to the last second.
Taking out the
Last
arrows?
minute.
He accidentally took out the animations and stuff, yeah. I'm surprised no one wanted to ask about the fact that the passwords are stored in the clear in Active Directory.
Isn't it a secured attribute? Did you say?
Yeah. So it's not a security problem. It would have. It is a centralized data. Yeah.
But it's one that you've already deployed.
But yeah, it's one. Yeah, with a very rich permission model.
And that was a slight dig at Philip Lieberman in the room. Hi, Phil.
Yeah, so the reason we didn't include encryption is it would have added a ton of complexity to the project. You've got key management, key distribution, key revocation, and it would not have materially increased the security of the solution. And so that's why we did not include that. Yeah, but Yuri did post this before. There, you can. There's a drop down, and you can say, I don't remember what they are. I always leave it at full complexity, but I think you can set it to just like numbers and letters. Yeah, there's 4 choices, so that so you can increase typability, for example. Like if you don't want to do the special characters, you can take those out. And something that is 20 characters long and all lowercase is probably pretty strong.
Is it always going to be a certain length, the password? Is it always going to be a minimum length?
It's going to be a specific length, and that is the one that you put in the group policy. The default is 14,
right.
but if you set it to 16, it will never be 15, it will never be 17.
Cool. Yep. So this is just me needing to brush up on groups. But from the, Greenfield admin domain, and if I'm doing all of my administration from that, the one thing that I'm thinking about here is Exchange. Exchange works with universal groups.
So you're not going to have any of those things mail-able? Yeah. Hey, you got to get a microphone. Oh, sorry. I don't know if this. Are they still recording? Is this still? Oh, it's not.
Okay, just talk loud.